All right, good morning, everyone. So we'll get started. There's still a lot of people joining, but just to be mindful of the time for everyone. So before we start, so just to let you know, all videos and audio have been turned off and muted. That's just to ensure a better experience for everyone. We have a lot of people online this morning, so I want to ensure that we have a smooth presentation. So on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll notice a chat box and a Q&A box. So for the question and answer period, we'll use the Q&A option, again, which is located on the right-hand side of your screen. You'll see throughout the presentation this morning, there will be several Q&A periods, so where I will answer questions on the topic that were covered. So what's going to happen at the end of the presentation, you're going to get a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. I'll provide additional information at the end, but you'll have access to all these hyperlinks that you'll see throughout the presentation. So that way you'll be able to use that deck as a reference document. And on that note, please keep in mind that immigration program and policies may change. So when you use the deck as a reference, whether it's a week or months from now, it's always a good idea to go back on the website and make sure that what you're looking at is the most up-to-date information. So my name is Michael Frenette. I'm an IRCC Outreach Officer for the Dedicated Service Channel. I'm based in Moncton, New Brunswick. Also on the line, my colleague Cindy Frenette, which is an IRCC Program Advisor with the Settlement Network. She's based in Fredericton, New Brunswick. So what we'll be covering today, so first we'll give you a brief introduction on Canada's immigration system. So for those of you who are new to the immigration world, we'll talk a bit about the background of the immigration program, provide you a role and overview of the responsibilities of each stakeholder in the process. We'll cover the Atlantic Immigration Program process, what is the permanent residence application, how to apply for a work permit for candidates that may require one. We'll cover the permanent resident status. Throughout the presentation, we'll talk about settlement and integration into the community. We'll provide you resources. And again, we'll have a final Q&A period. So Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, commonly known as the acronym IRCC, is the federal department that facilitates the arrival of immigrants and foreign nationals. We provide protection to refugees and also offer programs to help newcomers settle in Canada. IRCC is also responsible for Canadian passports and granting citizenship. In delivering its mandate, IRCC works closely with other federal government partners, including Service Canada, the Canada Border Service Agency, Global Affairs Canada, and all the provincial and territorial governments across the country. Having legal status in Canada means that you are authorized to enter and remain in Canada as a temporary or a permanent resident under the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, or as a Canadian citizen under the Citizenship Act. A temporary resident is a foreign national who is legally authorized to enter Canada for a temporary purpose, so either as a visitor, a student, or a worker. The admission of a foreign national into Canada as a temporary resident is a privilege and not a right. So temporary residents are subject to various conditions. It could be the length of their stay in Canada, what they are allowed and not allowed to do in Canada. And depending on the foreign national citizenship, they may also require what we call a temporary resident visa or an electronic travel authorization, ETA. So that would be required to actually physically enter Canada. And there's three types of temporary resident in Canada. So the first one would be issued what we call a visitor record. So it's a status document issued to foreign nationals that may extend or restrict their stay in Canada. It specifies the conditions and the duration of their stay in Canada. The second one is the study permit, which, as the name says, it is required in order for foreign nationals to be allowed to engage in studies in Canada. And the last one that we will cover later on in the presentation is the work permit, or an authorization to work without a work permit. So that is a requirement for a foreign national to be allowed to work in Canada. Condition of the work permit can include the work that they're permitted to perform, the location of the work, the hours of work, the date when they can work, and the expiry date of the permit. Some foreign nationals may have what we call an open work permit, which allows them to work for any employer in Canada. Then moving on to permanent resident, that is someone who has been given permanent resident status by immigrating to Canada, but is not yet a Canadian citizen. While most temporary residents will leave Canada at the end of their stay, if eligible, they may choose to apply for permanent residency. In general, a person is a Canadian citizen if they are born in Canada or born outside of Canada to a Canadian parent. Eligible permanent residents can apply to become Canadian citizens through the application process. So as an employer, your first step is to seek out Canadian citizens or permanent residents to fill employment vacancies in Canada. But if you are struggling to fill this position, there are options for hiring global talent. Employers can hire temporary residents already in Canada, including students who are authorized to work up to 20 hours per week while they are actively pursuing their program of studies. If the need is temporary or immediate, you can support them to apply for what we call that work permit. And there's two different types of pathways to obtain a work permit. First, there's the temporary foreign worker program and the international mobility program. So the work permit that we'll be covering today will fall under the international mobility program. As an employer, you must ensure that your candidate is authorized to work for you and that their status remains valid throughout their period of employment. If the need is permanent, you can support them to apply for what we call permanent residency, and there's various programs at the federal and the provincial level. So as you can see here, Canada has a range of economic immigration programs, both national and regional. And each program contributes in its own way towards strengthening Canada's labor market and economy. So the focus of today's session will be the Eclectic Immigration Program, which is highlighted in yellow. But as you can see here, if that program does not meet your need, there's plenty of other options. So before we start to talk about the program, so let's begin with some background information about the Eclectic Immigration Program. So it actually started in 2017, and it was called the Eclectic Immigration Pilot Program. And it was put in place to test an innovative approach to attract and retain skilled immigrants in the Atlantic region. The pilot was put together in close collaboration between the federal and provincial government, as well as employers and settlement agencies. And some of the key feature of the pilot was that it's employer-driven. So meaning that employers were directly involved in selecting candidates who meets their labor market needs and demands. So most immigration programs that we have in place now will begin with the candidate applying. So it's very different for the Eclectic Immigration Program. Employers also played a key role in the settlement and retention of newcomers, employers, and their families. Settlement support were offered in partnership with provinces, employers, and settlement agencies to ensure long-term retention. They were also offered earlier in the process to better position newcomers for success. So the pilot ended in December 2021. However, due to the success, the Government of Canada did announce the permanent program on January 1st, 2022. So while this is a different program, there's many similarities which have been carried over from the pilot to the program. So IRCC conducted an evaluation of the pilot, which found that the expected outcomes were being met and identified several areas that we could strengthen the program. So the evaluation found that the pilot was helping Atlantic employers to fill labor market needs, mostly in the technical occupation and skilled trade level. So many of these employers were also first-time users of immigration, and they valued the federal support that helped make them immigration accessible. And we'll cover that later on. That same support is available through the dedicated service channel for the program. The evaluation also found that settlement plans were helpful with meeting the integration needs of newcomers, and that the majority of them remained in Atlantic Canada after the first year. So by the end of the pilot, employers made over 9,500 jobs offers that resulted in over 8,000 newcomers to the Atlantic region. So now we'll review the role and responsibilities of each stakeholder under the permanent program. So with various players involved in the immigration process, it is important to clarify the roles and responsibilities of each. So as mentioned, you as the employer will play a lead role in selecting candidates and supporting their integration and retention in the community. As part of the process, employers will participate in training delivered by IRCC, so that's today's training, and another training delivered by service provider organization that Cindy would cover later on in the presentation. Employers are responsible for applying for provincial designation and endorsement, which again we'll cover later on in the presentation. The eclectic provinces, they also play a key role in the application process as they are responsible for the designation of employers and the endorsing of job offers for your candidate. The candidate you select will need to gather all necessary documents and submit your immigration application to IRCC. IRCC on their end will process your candidate's immigration application as well as provide you support through the dedicated service channel. And last but not least, the settlement provider organization in your area and overseas provide your candidate and their family members with services and support to assist them with arrival, integration into the community. So as you can see here, and for those who are familiar with the pilot, this is very similar. So it's a four-step process, and step 1 to 3 are for the employers and administered by the provincial government. So basically, the province will provide the designation, the endorsement of candidate, and issue the endorsement. So once those steps are completed, the candidate can submit an application for permanent residence to IRCC. They may also be eligible to submit an application for a work permit to enable them to work for you while their permanent application is being processed, and we'll cover that later on in the presentation. So before we review each step a bit more in detail, I'm just going to take a quick pause and see if there's any question about what we just covered, so the introduction to immigration or the transition from the pilot to the permanent program. Again, we'll be using the Q&A section, which is located on the right-hand side of your screen, and you can just type in your question. So I'll just take a brief pause. All right, so we have a few questions. So first question, how does the AIP program differ from the New Brunswick PNP? Well, the end goal is the same, so candidate will be granted permanent residency. The only thing is the selection criteria are completely different. So it really depends on what you're trying to achieve, what are the qualifications of your candidate. So you really need to look both programs side by side and see where does your candidate fit best. But ultimately, both will be pathways to permanent residence. Yes, so at the end of the presentation, you will get the PowerPoint presentation, so you'll have access to all these hyperlinks. And yes, there'll be a second training, which we'll cover later on in the presentation, that is required before getting provincial designation. So I see a few comments from candidates here. Please note that today's session is directed towards employers only. So any candidates that are online, feel free to attend. I mean, the information is general public information, but I will not entertain questions from candidates. I will not answer questions from candidates. This session is meant for employers only, but feel free to attend for general knowledge purposes. All right, so I'll move on to the next section. And again, there'll be another Q&A section at the end. So if you have other question, feel free again to use the Q&A section located on the right-hand side of your screen. Right, so the first step in the process is employer designation, which again is administered by the provincial government. So to be designated employer, you must be in good standing and have been operating for at least 2 years in Atlantic Canada. You need to work with a settlement service provider organization to help your candidate and their family member to get settlement services in the official language of their choice, sorry. You must also take the step to create a welcoming workplace and may be required to complete the competency training, which Cindy will cover later on in the presentation. So you must also complete this mandatory onboarding training session, so today's objective. And once you meet all these requirements, you can apply to be designated at the province. In fact, you can apply to be designated even before you identify your candidate. So if your application is approved by the provincial government, you'll be issued what we call a confirmation of designation. And you may want to refer to the provincial government website for more information on the employer designation process. So although they are very similar, there are some nuances, so you will need to access the information on the provincial government to find out exactly how to get designated based on your location. So now my colleague Cindy Lynn will discuss the step that you'll need to take to ensure that you create a welcoming workplace. Cindy Lynn?
Thank you. So as part of the designation stage, you will need to make contact with a settlement service provider in your community to learn about the services that they provide and also to establish a partnership with them to help support your newcomer employees. Settlement services are designed to help newcomers settle and adjust to life in Canada. As employers, you will help your newcomers access settlement services and, when necessary, support the provision of settlement services. You can click on the link in the presentation for a list of settlement service providers in your community or nearby. Remember that employers play a significant role in supporting the settlement of newcomer employees and their families. Service provider organizations can help you succeed in this role. Next slide. So creating a welcoming workplace and completing your intercultural competency training. During the designation stage, you will also commit to ensuring your newcomer employee will be entering a welcoming workplace. Intercultural competency training can help ensure you have the skills and knowledge needed to prepare your workplace for your newcomer employee's arrival. Participating provinces will deem whether it's necessary for you to take intercultural competency training. It will need to be completed before you are able to endorse your first candidate. You'll need to include proof of completion when you submit your endorsement application to the provincial government. The intercultural competency training is designed for the senior management level. It will require a half-day commitment, and it is available in French and English, either in person or by live webinar. The training will cover topics such as creating and welcoming culturally inclusive workplaces, effective teamwork within a culturally diverse workplace, considering the newcomer perspective, understanding cultural variations, culturally appropriate communication, and systemic barrier and challenges. On to you, Mikael.
Thank you, Cindy. All right, so before we go on, I'm just going to again take a brief pause to see if you have any question on the employer designation process or the intercultural competency training. Again, we are using the Q&A section, which is located on the right-hand side of your screen. So I have a question. So if someone has more than one company, would that training need to be taken for each one? So that would be, Ramona, a question for the provincial government, because it would really depend on the structure of the company and if you are involved in both and whatnot, if same staff are involved. So I would reach out to your provincial government and they can clarify that based on your situation. So it may or may not be required depending on how the companies are set up. Yes, this is a mandatory training. So you do need this training in order to become designated as an employer. So the intercultural competency training is not part of this training. So it is a separate training. Basically, after the presentation today, I'll send an email with the detail. So you'll have access to all the registration link. So that company, again, that training again is a separate training. And it is also a mandatory training, yes. All right, perfect. So moving on to the next section. Again, we'll pause later on for another question and answer period. So before embarking on your recruiting journey, you must understand the basic criteria of the program. And having a good understanding of the criterias and knowing the tools that are available to assist you during the process will greatly improve your success rate. So a key resource that we use in immigration is the National Occupational Classification, or the NOC table, NOC. The NOC is Canada's national system for describing occupation. It is comprised of about 30,000 jobs title that are organized according to the occupation area and the skill level. So think of the NOC table as a giant dictionary of all occupation in Canada. So in the context of the NOC, skill level corresponds to the type and or amount of training or education typically required to work in a specific occupation. So skill level are identified by the letter A through D, with 0 representing all job in a management position. So skill level A are professional jobs that usually require university education, such as accountants, IT professional, doctors, lawyers, and so on. Skill level B are technical and skilled trade that usually require college education or specialized training or training as an apprentice. And we can think of jobs such as cooks, electricians, plumbers, and so on. Skill level C are semi-skilled jobs that usually require secondary school and or job-specific training. We can think of customer service representative, long-haul truck drivers, and fish plant workers. And the last one, skill level D, is entry-level job that usually gives on-the-job type of training, such as food counter attendant, trade helpers, labor, cleaning staff, and cashier. So if you want to hire a foreign worker, you will need to know what is the NOC code and the skill level before you can make a job offer. And that goes not only for the Atlantic Immigration Program, but for all immigration programs. For the purpose of the Atlantic Immigration Program, only job offers at the skill level 0, A, B, or C are eligible. And we do have an online tool that can help you find what is the NOC. You see the hyperlink on the slide here. So if you are unsure of the NOC code associated with your job, you can first try to search by the job title, find the closest match, and review the main duties and the employment requirement to determine if they correspond to those associated with your job. Many job titles used every day in the labor market are not included in the list, so it is really key to focus on the main duties of that NOC and not to rely solely on the job title. Now, it is important to ensure that your candidate meets the requirements of the program. You will see that the requirements cover the skilled worker job offer, work experience, education, and ability to communicate in English or in French. The minimum requirement will differ slightly based on the NOC category that applies to the job offer. So if you can see here, if you have a job offer in a NOC 0, the job offer will need to be at least 1 year after PR is granted. The work experience 1 year in a NOC 0, A, B, or C. Education is 1 year of post-secondary education, and the language is a 5, either in English or in French. Please note that some occupations may require provincial approval. As an example, a nurse will require approval in order to work in a specific province, so you must ensure that your candidate meets the criteria for that position as well. Now let's look at the minimum work experience requirement a bit more closely. So all candidates, except for qualifying Atlantic graduates, will require at least 1 year of full-time work experience at the NOC 0, A, B, or C, and that is within the last 5 years. For immigration purposes, 1 year of full-time work experience is 30 hours per week for 12 months. which equal to 1,560 hours. Candidates can also meet the requirement through an equal amount of part-time work. For example, 15 hours a week for 24 months, which is also equal to 1,560 hours. They must have performed the action described in the lead statement of the occupation as set out in the DOC, and have performed as well the majority number of the main duties, including all the essential duties. The work experience can be acquired either in Canada or overseas. If acquired in Canada, the candidate must have been authorized to work in Canada. Any type of volunteer and unpaid work does not count. So only work experience where wages are paid or commission is earned would count. Experience through self-employment does not count as well, so it must have been obtained in the employment of a third party. So there's a, sorry. So sorry about that. Been battling a cold for the last few days, so kind of losing my voice a bit this morning. So qualified eclectic graduates are exempt from the work experience requirement. That being said, they do have some additional requirements that they need to meet. So the application must be received within 24 months after graduation, and they must have completed a 2-year post-secondary educational credential or IR from a publicly funded institution in Atlantic Canada. So that's a key criteria. Their program of study or training cannot be English or French second language course, or any type of distance learning for more than half of the program would not be eligible. For the entire duration of their studies, they must have been full-time student and also have the proper authorization to study in Canada. They must also have lived in the Atlantic province for at least 16 months in the last 2 years before getting their education credential. So now that we reviewed the program criteria, we can focus on finding a candidate that will meet your need. So now that you have identified a candidate, so maybe you already have someone in mind, someone currently working for you that would be a great fit. But if you don't have a candidate, you'll need to go out and recruit someone. And probably the first thing that comes to mind is recruiting abroad when you talk about immigration, which is certainly an option that we will explore shortly. But often, employers are able to find global talent right here in Canada. There are pools of international trained workers and many with Canadian education and work experience. Canada's Job Bank is a free and easy to use bilingual website that provides job listing and labor market information tools to connect workers and employers across the country. So that's a great resource. Your existing employees may also be able to refer you to a candidate. There are several networks such as the Francophone Immigration Network and the Réseau de Développement Économique et d'Employabilité that can connect you to potential candidates in your region. Job fairs across the country can bring face-to-face with promising candidates in your region, community, or sector. We often forget, but universities and colleges provide many services, including bridge-to-work programs and placement services that can connect you with newly graduate students. And last but not least, Settlement Service Providers Organization. They help newcomers settle in Canada and also find employment in their new communities. So they can often connect you with job-ready newcomers that are ready to work and are looking for work. But if you are unable to find candidate in Canada, you may want to recruit candidate from overseas. Several countries provide support to employers looking to recruit skilled workers abroad. For instance, in the European Union countries, public employment service agencies connect job seekers with employers. So although they're structured differently in each country, these government agencies help employers obtain labor market information and provide support services at the local and national level. And many other countries offer similar services. Philippines would be another example. On our end, IRCC, we host a well-attended job fair every year for bilingual and French-speaking individuals. So this is a great place for you to recruit individuals from Europe, Maghreb, West Africa, and that would meet your labor need. So the Canadian Embassy in Paris partner with public employment agencies to connect Canadian employers with qualified bilingual and francophone candidates as part of the Destination Canada Mobility Forum International Job Fair. So we post vacancies and pre-screen candidates on behalf of Canadian employers free of charge. For more information, visit the Destination Canada website or reach out directly to our embassy in Paris, who will be able to answer any question you may have. If you are using a recruiter, so please ensure that any third-party recruiting on your behalf complies with the relevant federal, provincial, and territorial laws that regulate recruitment. We also recommend that you refer to the employer's roadmap for hiring and retaining international trained workers, which is available online at the hyperlink available on this slide. And that roadmap will provide you useful information about recruiting, hiring, training, and retaining international trained workers. As part of the process, you or your candidate may consider hiring an immigration representative. So you don't need to hire one. It is really a personal choice. But if you are using a representative, it is important that that person is registered with the appropriate regulatory body. It is also important to know that using a representative will not draw special attention to your application, nor will it guarantee an approval. The immigration representative can explain and give advice on immigration options, help you choose the best immigration program, fill out and submit an immigration application on your behalf, and communicate with IRCC on your behalf. Immigration representatives that charge a fee or receive any type of payment are called authorized representatives, and they must be registered and member of good standing with the appropriate regulatory body. It is an offense for anyone other than an authorized representative to represent or advise clients for a fee or any other consideration. So example could be of authorized representative, a lawyer, paralegal, or an immigration consultant. If you or your candidate choose to use one, make sure that they are authorized. So that is your responsibility. So in other words, that they have a license to practice and give advice. If you or your candidate uses an unauthorized representative, whether it's in Canada or abroad, we may return the application or even refuse it. When choosing an immigration representative, ask people you trust to recommend someone and choose carefully. So on this slide here, you can see some tips to protect yourself from fraud. So always ask for references and credential. Be careful of anything that sounds too good to be true. Be aware of representatives who would suggest or encourage you to provide false information. Any type of payment in cash should be provided with receipt. It is also illegal to charge an employee for an employment opportunity, so that's something you need to remember. Don't ever sign any type of blank document or document in a foreign language. Always keep a signed receipt. And you can find additional information on choosing a representative, filing a complaint, or reporting fraud on our website here. So again, I'll take a quick pause before we move on to the next section. So if you have any questions on the program requirements or using a immigration representative, again, we're using the Q&A function located on the right-hand side of your screen. So if the candidate is a freelancer, but under contract with a third party, does that count as work experience? So it would really depend on how it's structured. So Gabriela, I would invite you to reach out to us and we can clarify that for you because there's some follow-up question that we need to ask. So definitely reach out to us. Yes, if a candidate is already in Canada but working For another employer in another province, it is possible for you to hire that person. There's some measure in place that would allow you to obtain a work permit for that person. So definitely it's an option. Yes. So yes, we'll talk about settlement service provider organization throughout the presentation. So there'll be more information shared on that topic. So someone is putting a scenario forward. So they advertise and have several applicants from overseas. That person is wondering, should they do the screening internally? Yes. So you are responsible for identifying candidate data. So that would be the responsibility of the employer to identify the candidate. You need to ensure that the candidate meets the program criteria. Just to ensure that you would put forward a successful candidate. So if the candidate is overseas, they're wondering about language testing. We'll talk about language testing a bit later on, but there's the option of doing the language test overseas as well. So there's some approved tests. Again, I'll cover that later on in the presentation. But as long as they take a approved IRCC test, it would equate to what we call the Canadian language benchmark. So there's a conversion scale available on our website that would give you the conversion score based on the test that you took. For the recruitment agency, yes, so you are responsible. So if you wish to use a recruitment agency, you as an employer need to ensure that they meet all federal regulatory standard in that country or here in Canada. So you are responsible for that screening as well, yes. All right, perfect. So we'll move on to the next section. Again, we'll pause after this chapter, just if there's any other question. So someone is wondering about processing time. So the processing time to get employer designation and job offers, so that's a provincial step. So you'll need to reach out to them. But the processing time for permanent residency is 80% of applications are processed in 12 months or less. All right, so now once you have found a candidate, your next step is to offer them a job and to connect them with a settlement service provider organization to create what we call a settlement plan. So we'll talk about the settlement plan a bit later in the presentation, but first let's look at the job offer. So you'll need to make a job offer using what we call the offer of employment to a foreign national form, which is available online at the hyperlink on this slide. So the job offer must be full-time, meaning at least 30 hours per week, non-seasonal at the NOC 0, A, B, or C, and at least 1 year in duration or permanent if it's a NOC C position. And they need to be at the same skill level or higher as the qualifying work experience. The wages you are offering must be within the range of wages that are for this particular occupation within that specific region. So there's a tool online that would provide you that information. And your candidate must meet the employment requirement of the NOC, and the job offer cannot be from a company that is owned by the candidate or their spouse. So there's some exemption, so that would be in the healthcare sector. So as we mentioned previously, that job offer must be at the same skill level or higher as the qualifying work experience. So the only situation where what we call downskilling, so which means that someone who would have work experience in a NOC 0, as an example, could accept a position in a lower NOC. So that would be for the healthcare sector. So for job offer in the following positions, as you can see here, anything in the NOC level, practical nurse or registered nurse. So anyone who would have experience as a practical nurse or registered nurse could accept a position in the lower NOC, as we see the two examples here. So that is solely to allow them to come here in Canada and write the exam to be allowed to practice as a practical nurse or a registered nurse. As an example, in New Brunswick, it can take up to 2 years before the person is able to write the exam, and that candidate has to be in Canada. So that's why we allow them to work into a lower NOC while they prepare and get ready for the exam. All right, so now I'll pass it on to my colleague Cindy. We'll talk about the settlement plan process.
Thank you. So a settlement plan is based on an assessment of the newcomer's need, and it is designed to help inform them of many aspects of settling in Canada. It will provide details on how and where they can find the services and support they may need. Once you have identified a candidate and made a job offer, you will want to direct them to get a settlement plan as part of the endorsement stage. To get a settlement plan, the candidate and their family members will need to work with an AIP-approved service provider in Canada if they're already here, and overseas if they've not yet arrived in Canada. You can click on the link in the presentation that will be shared afterwards for a list of AIP designated service providers, which includes those that are located in Canada, as well as the service providers who offer services outside of Canada. The service providers will assess the needs of the candidates and any other adult family members who will be living in Canada. The service provider will then prepare individualized settlement plans for the candidates and their family members. The plans are prepared free of charge and will help the families settle in Canada by providing resources and information related to the needs and the needs to their needs, and to the needs of the community. A copy of the settlement plans will need to be included in the endorsement application to the provincial government. After the newcomer arrives in Canada, it is a good idea to refer them to a local settlement service provider in your community so that they can update their settlement plan and help them with any questions that they might have. To you, Mikhail.
Thank you, Cindy. So now you have made the job offer and your candidate as their settlement plan. So the next step in the process is to receive what we call provincial endorsement. So the provincial government must endorse your job offer before the candidate can apply for permanent residency. The endorsement application will ask you to show that you have not been able to fill the job with someone locally. Please note, for those of you who are familiar with immigration, you will not require a labor market impact assessment, so you are exempt from that process. You will need to include the completed and signed offer of employment to a foreign national, and the job offer must obviously meet the program requirements. You will also need to include the settlement plan for the candidate and their family member. So you can consult the provincial government website for more detail on the endorsement application process. And if the endorsement application is approved, the province will provide the candidate with a certificate of endorsement. They will need that certificate to apply for permanent residency and for a work permit if required. So it is important to note that the certificate of endorsement is valid for 12 months. So this means that your candidate will have 12 months to apply for permanent residency. So as you'll see, you'll need to reach out to the province directly, although again, the provincial endorsement process are very similar. So there are some nuances, so you want to reach out to them directly to find out the exact process. So IRCC dedicated service channel was created to support employers with navigating the immigration process. So to be eligible, you must be a designated employer with at least one endorsed candidate. In other words, the provincial government has endorsed your job offer and your candidate is able to apply for permanent residency. So once you are eligible for the service, you will receive additional information on how to access IRCC's dedicated service channel. So we strongly recommend that you use this free service. You will get help with the steps in the process, receive system navigation tips, and have the opportunity to ask immigration-related questions to an account manager that will be there to support you throughout your immigration journey. So the service is available to designated employers for 1 full year following the endorsement of their first candidate. So again, we'll take a quick pause. So if you have any question on the job offer or provincial endorsement, settlement plan, or the IRCC dedicated service channel, we'll use the Q&A section on the right-hand side of your screen. So someone is asking, would the candidate have an authorization to work in Canada while they're waiting for their permanent residency application to be processed? Yes, so if your candidate is not already authorized, there is an option to apply for a work permit, which we'll cover later on in the presentation. Can the candidate be related to the owner of the business? Yes, absolutely. As long as the candidate is not the spouse or common law partner, that is fine. Just a quick second here, I'll just summarize the next question. So basically, someone is looking as far as clarification for timeline. So first of all, for provincial endorsement, you will need to verify with the province directly. It will vary from province to province and depending on their workload and whatnot. So that's the first thing you'll need to confirm with them, how long it would take to get a provincial endorsement. But once you have a provincial endorsement, processing time for permanent residency is 12 months or less in 80% of cases. And as far as when that person can start to work with you, work permit processing time will vary based on where the person is located. So if the person is already in Canada, it's going to be the in Canada processing time. If the person is in another country, it will vary based on their country of origin. So later on in the presentation, you'll see there's an hyperlink that will bring you to our website, and that will show you the processing time depending on where the candidate is. So that will really vary. It can go anywhere from 2 weeks to about 6-7 months processing time, depending where they are in the world. And processing time are updated weekly. So if you want to hire someone using a work permit under the Atlantic Immigration Program, yes, you will need the certificate of endorsement. That being said, if there's someone already in Canada, so maybe someone on an open work permit, you can hire them directly under that work permit. So that's definitely an option. Amanda, if you have a candidate in mind and you're not quite sure, at the end of the presentation, I'll provide you, or we'll provide everyone with our email address. So you can reach out, we can set up a call, maybe go through the process, because it seems like you have a candidate in mind. So we can definitely support you through that process. So I mentioned, yes, so the job offer must be a full-time job offer. So it is 30 hours per week. When I said that part-time would qualify, it's only for the work experience. So basically, we're looking for 1 year of full-time work experience, 30 hours per week, or the equivalent, which is 2 years at 15 hours per week. So that's only for the job experience. But for the job offer, it must be a full-time job offer. So once you are approved as a designated employer, there's no expiry date. So that's permanent unless it's revoked by the province. But this is now a permanent program, so there's no expiry date. Absolutely, the candidate can apply directly for permanent residency and skip the work permit. So the work permit is only for those who would either like to start to work immediately in Canada or are not in Canada or whatnot. But yes, this is a permanent residence program. Yeah, so even though if you were participating in the pilot, you are still eligible for the IRCC dedicated service channel. So once you have endorsed your first candidate, you will have access to that service for a period of 1 year. In the meantime, if you do need support, you can reach out to the outreach officers, which are myself and Ariana, and our email address will be provided at the end. So I see people putting email address in the chat. I would ask you not to do that, please. Phone number as well. Uh, Again, this session is meant for employers only. So if the candidate currently works for you, is the endorsement process any different? No, the endorsement process would be the same. So if someone satisfied the requirement for the Atlantic graduate stream, but is currently on a leave of absence from work, does this impact your ability to apply? No. So as long as they meet the program requirement, if they are on leave of absence, whether it's for personal or medical or whatnot, that would not have an impact. As long as they have the job offer, they meet all the requirements, that would have no impact. So is it possible to apply for a job offer that was provided before receiving designation? So in this situation, basically, as I can see, the candidate is already working for you. So even though if the candidate is working for you, you would need to offer a new job offer for the purpose of the program. So this is obviously a seamless transition. The candidate, you don't have to fire the candidate and rehire him, so he can keep on working for you. But for IRCC purposes, you would need to fill the offer of employment form and make that new job offer, basically. That is correct. So the Eclectic Immigration Program is a permanent residency program, so that is completely separate from applying for a work permit. There is a work permit component if you need to hire the person right away, but the AIP is for permanent residency. So if the employee quits while being indoors, what happens? So you as an employer, so either that the employee decide to leave on their own, or you realize that the employee is not meeting your needs and you need to let them go, you need to notify the province and us, because that will have an impact on their application. They will no longer be eligible for the program. So Ali, I would invite you about your question about long haul truckers and the program, the course and whatnot, to reach out to us directly after the session. We can address that offline. So I have a question here for the provincial nominee program. I would direct you directly to the province in question because the provincial nominee program, as the name says, is handled at the provincial government. So it could vary depending on the province and on the situation. So Aaron, I would suggest that you reach out to your province directly. All right, perfect. So now we're about halfway into the training session already. So we'll take a quick 5 minutes break and we'll be right back. So we'll see you guys back at 10:03. Thank you. All right, perfect. So we'll get started for the second half of the presentation. All right, so now we're getting into the final step is where your candidate applies for permanent residence. So they are responsible for gathering and submitting all the forms and documents. There's document checklists and instruction guides that are available online to assist your candidate in ensuring that all forms and documents are included when they apply. The document checklists are non-exhaustive lists, so it is important that your candidates submit enough proof that they meet the minimum requirements of the program. If the documents are in a language other than English or French, a translation by a certified translator will also be required. Your candidate will need to include all family members in their application, even if they do not intend to come to Canada. So that would include spouse, common law partner, and all dependent children. So we recommend that your candidate gathers their document early to ensure minimal delays. Documents related to education, language proficiency, and police check generally take longer to obtain. A valid certificate of endorsement from the provincial government is also required with the permanent residence application. So as you may recall, the certificate of endorsement is valid for 12 months. Your candidate will need to submit proof of previous relevant work experience. The document checklist provides examples of documents to submit, but it could be such as pay stubs, T4, work contracts, and employment reference letter. And we'll provide you with some additional details shortly. Just as a reminder that the qualified Atlantic graduates do not require to prove their previous work experience. The completed and signed offer of employment to a foreign national is also required with the permanent residence application. For proof of education, qualified Atlantic graduates will need to provide proof that they completed a 2-year post-secondary educational credential or IR from a publicly funded institution in an Atlantic province. Also, they must have graduated in the 24 months before IRCC received their permanent residence application. All other candidates will need to provide proof that their level of education meets the minimum requirements of the program. For candidate with job offer at the NOC 0 and A skill level, their minimum is a completed Canadian 1-year post-secondary certificate or the equivalent. For candidates with a job offer at the NOC B or C level, the minimum is graduation from Canadian high school or the equivalent. Your candidate must also demonstrate their language skills in one of Canada's official languages, English or French, by taking a language test approved by IRCC. They will also need to show that they have enough money to support themselves and their family after they immigrate to Canada. So we'll share more detail on the proof of funds shortly. Your candidate and your family member that are 18 or older will need to obtain police certificates. They will need to submit police certificates for any country or territory that they have spent 6 months or more in a row within the last 10 years or since the age of 18. So depending on the number of countries or territories your candidate has lived in, this may take some time. There's also resources online that can provide information on how and where to get police certificates from different countries and territories. So please note that it is not necessary to obtain one for Canada. So let's look more closely at the proof of work, relevant work experience. It is important that your candidate's supporting documents are detailed enough to satisfy an officer of the work experience history. Incomplete employment letters can lead to delays or a refusal. The candidate must also submit proof for each work experience declared. Reference or experience letters from current or past employers should be on an official document printed on company letterhead and include the following information. So as you can see here, very standard, their name, position, job duties, the dates, and whatnot. For Canadian work experience, the candidate may include copies of T4 tax information slips and notice of assessment issued by Canada Revenue Agency to prove that they actually occupy the position. We also recommend that they include any additional information or proof that will help substantiate their candidate's employment history. Now, moving on to the educational credential assessment. So if the candidate completed the level of education required for the program in Canada, they will need to submit proof of their Canadian education credential with their application, so the diploma or certificate. If their diploma, certificate, or degree was not completed in Canada, they will need to obtain an educational credential assessment, commonly referred to as an ECA. So the ECA is used to verify that the foreign degree, diploma, or certificate is valid and equal to a Canadian one. IRCC will only accept an ECA from one of the organizations we designate. So you can find a list of these organizations online. Now, looking at language tests. So in order to demonstrate your language skills in English or French, your candidate will need to take a language test approved by IRCC. To measure levels, IRCC uses the Canadian Language Benchmark for English or the Niveau de compétence linguistique canadien for French. So please refer to the language test chart, which is available online to help you determine the CLB or NCLC level for your candidate based on the test it took. For candidate with job offer in the DOC 0, A, or B skill level, the minimum is a CLB or NCLC of 5. And for candidate with job offers at the DOC C skill level, the minimum is a CLB or NCLC of 4. Language test result must be less than 2 years old when applying for permanent residency. Now, there's some application fees associated with permanent residence application, and some are non-refundable and others are refundable if the permanent residency application is withdrawn or refused. Your candidate will need to provide proof of funds for settlement in Canada. In other words, proof that they can support themselves and their family once in Canada. The amount of money they require will depend on the size of their family, and your candidate cannot borrow this money from another person. The fund can be in the form of cash or a document that show or guarantee payment, such as a stock, bond, treasure bill, bank draft, and so on. If your candidate is living and working in Canada with a valid work permit, they do not need to submit proof of funds with their permanent resident application. So your candidate has now submitted their application for permanent residence to IRCC, and you may be wondering what happened next. So IRCC will perform what we call a completeness check to make sure that all required application forms and documents are completed and submitted. We will also ensure that the application processing fees have been paid. If the application is missing any of the requested document, it will be returned to your candidate, so that will cause additional delay. If the application is completed, it will be placed into processing. Your candidate will receive an acknowledgement of receipt letter or email that will provide them with their IRCC office file number. At a later date, your candidate and family member will need to complete biometrics and pass an immigration medical exam. When the time comes, they will receive instruction from IRCC. The application will then undergo a detailed review by an IRCC officer. The officer will consider all the information and documentation provided with the application, including any additional information they request from you or your candidate. If a job offer you made to a candidate has changed or is no longer valid, you must inform IRCC and the province as soon as possible. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the processing time for permanent residency is 12 months or less for 80% of application. So biometric collection, so basically fingerprints and photograph, and also an immigration medical examination will be required for all applicants. So IRCC again will provide the instruction in due time. So again, we'll take a quick pause to see if there's any question on the permanent residence application or the required document. The candidate family member does not require language tests, so only the principal applicant. So Aaron, so if the candidate is already in Canada with a work permit, they do not need to supply proof of fund. So correct. So biometrics are not submitted with the original application. They are submitted afterward. Your candidate will receive a request for biometrics. Because in some cases, candidate, for those who are familiar with immigration, so candidate may have received biometrics in the past, but for the purpose of permanent residency, they will need to undergo biometric again, just to ensure that there's no criminality that would have happened, or any immigration issues that would have happened between when the first biometrics were provided. So if the candidate is from a country of war and not certain if they're able to obtain certain document, is there any sort of leniency on that? So whether doesn't really matter what the situation is. So for any time that a client is not able to provide a document, they need to provide an explanation letter as to why they're not able to provide the document, and that they need to show as well that they made an attempt to obtain the document. And then it will be up to the officer reviewing the file whether they provide an exemption from that document or whether they decide to provide sufficient time to the candidate to obtain the said document. So again, they need to inform us, they need to show that they made an effort to obtain the document, and then the decision maker assigned to the file will make a final decision. All right, so we'll move on to the next section. So we talked about it throughout the presentation, but your candidate may be eligible for a one-year work permit if you need to fill the position urgently. So you must indicate in your endorsement application to the province that you want to hire the candidate on a work permit. So when you apply to the province for candidate endorsement, you need to let them know at that stage. So you can choose this option if the candidate does not already have a work permit that authorizes them to work for you, or maybe they're outside of the country. If approved, the province will provide you and the candidate with a referral letter to submit with the work permit application. You may be familiar with the Labor Market Impact Assessment, or the LMIA process. As I mentioned earlier, you are exempt from this process, so there's no need for you to obtain that Labor Market Impact Assessment. The candidate must also commit to apply for permanent residency within 90 days after submitting their work permit application. So again, as soon as they apply for the work permit, they have 90 days to apply for permanent residency. If the work permit is approved, the candidate can start working for you while we process their application for permanent residency. It is important to note that an approved work permit does not guarantee that the permanent residency application will be approved. Now, if you do go with the work permit, there's some additional steps that you need to follow as an employer before the candidate can actually apply for the work permit. So, as I mentioned, the first step is to inform the province that you need to hire that person so they can issue that referral letter. Then, as an employer, you'll need to access what we call the employer portal. So that portal is for employer hiring temporary foreign workers, and it allows employers to submit offer of employment for a temporary worker that does not require that labor market impact assessment. So if you haven't already done so, you will need to enroll in the employer portal, and there's a guide online, there's an hyperlink on this slide that will help you with the enrollment process, and there's also a user guide. So once enrolled, you will need to submit an offer of employment using the LMIA exemption code C18 Atlantic Immigration Program. You will need to pay the employer compliance fee of $230. And once these steps are completed, the portal will provide you with an employment number, which start with the letter A and is followed by 7 numbers. So the candidate will need the employment number and the payment received for the compliance fee in order to submit their work permit application. Similar to permanent residency, your candidate is responsible for gathering their documents and submitting their work permit application online to IRCC. They can refer again to a document checklist and instruction guide to ensure that they submit all the required documents with their application. Your candidate will have to provide sufficient proof that they meet the job requirement. In other words, that they are eligible for the job. So, for example, if any type of valid provincial or territorial trade certificate is required, they would need to provide that. They must also meet the language, education, and work experience requirement of the program prior to being approved for a work permit. As I touched on earlier, work permit processing time are posted online and updated weekly, and it would depend on where they're applying from, so whether it's in Canada or overseas. So employers do have responsibilities when hiring foreign national or a temporary foreign worker on a work permit. So as you can see here, it is very similar to what you would follow as an employer when you hire a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident. But with a foreign national, you need to make sure that you see their work permit, that you know the expiry date, and that you comply with the condition listed on the work permit, including the job location and expiry date. You need to meet the details of the offer of employment, including the occupation, the duties that match the NOC code, the pay, and the working condition. In some cases, if it's not offered at the provincial level, you need to set up medical insurance for the workers and so on. You need to be active in the company. Obviously, you need to meet all applicable federal, provincial employment and recruiting laws. You need to make sure that the workplace is free of physical, sexual, or financial abuse. And you need to cooperate with employment inspection if they are requested. Sorry about that. Give me a second here. All right, thank you. So many of these individuals that you may hire will have also spouse and common law partners, and their partners may be eligible for what we call an open work permit. So you don't need to offer them a job offer, but if you have a need, you can certainly hire them. So the open work permit let the older work for any employer in Canada. So you don't have to go through the process of making a job offer and whatnot. The duration of the work permit will match your candidate's work permit, and any of their children will also be eligible for a study permit. So this means that they can attend school in Canada. So we'll take a quick break and see if there's any questions on the work permit application or employer's responsibilities. Again, we're using the Q&A function on the right-hand side of the screen. So what about Canadian graduate from other provinces? So they would not meet the requirement for the exemption of work experience. So Canadian graduate from other province will need to have the work experience. So Drake has a question about the temporary work permit. So if you have a question about work permit, I would invite you to reach out to us after the call so we can have that discussion. There's several pathways for work permit. So Polina as well, if you have questions about the employer portal, I would invite you to reach out to us afterward, because the confirmation number should be issued automatically once you submit the job offer. So that is correct, Aaron. So once the job offer, the province has provided their endorsement, the candidate has 12 months to apply for permanent residency. But if they request a work permit, they are committing to apply for permanent residency within 90 days. The reason is because this program is not meant to be a work permit program, it's meant to be a permanent residency program. Aaron, for your question for workers' compensation, so that would actually fall under the provincial jurisdiction. So I would invite you to reach out to the government of Nova Scotia in this case. So the same email address that has been provided, and they can confirm what type of coverage or if coverage is required. So they could answer that for you. All right. Yeah, candidate with school-age children will require a study permit. So there's no fee required for the Atlantic Immigration Program from the employer point of view, unless that you are using the work permit. So then there would be the $230 compliance fee. But if it's only for permanent residency, there's no fees for the employer. All right, so we'll move on to the last section. So if the permanent residence application is approved, your candidate and your family member will become permanent residents of Canada. They will be issued a permanent resident card, which can be used as a proof of their status in Canada. In order to keep their permanent resident status, they must also comply with residency requirements and obligation, and all of that is available online. As permanent residents, they will have the right to get most social benefits that Canadian citizens receive, including health coverage. They can live, work, and study anywhere in Canada. They have access to all of IRCC funded settlement services, including language training. They can apply for Canadian citizenship when eligible, and they'll receive the protection under the Canadian laws and Canadian Charter of Right and Freedom. So now my colleague Cindy Lib will cover more about the services available to newcomers.
As permanent residents, the newcomer employee and their family members will be eligible for a variety of settlement services based on their needs. These services will help them settle and adjust to life in Canada. For example, service providers offer information and orientation services, which help newcomers get informed about life in Canada, including things such as our laws, the rights and responsibilities, and how to obtain essential public services. The service providers can also help with housing and assist with registering children in schools within the French and English school boards. Service providers also offer language assessments and language training both in English and French. Employment-related assistance is another service available to permanent residents. This includes things such as resume development and job search strategies. Community Connection is a service that connects newcomers to their communities through such things as group events and activities. This enables newcomers to develop a sense of belonging in their new community. IRCC funded settlement services. Once the newcomers are a permanent resident, they can seek services from any service provider. At that point, it is no longer needed to be one of our AIP approved service provider from which they obtain their services. You can work with any local organization that provides services to newcomers. For instance, you may have a service provider that may be easier to access or closer to your area. And if none are available in your immediate area, There are some who provide distance services, such as services online or by itinerant staff, meaning staff that are located closer to your rural area or that will travel to your location. Temporary residents who have applied for permanent residence through the AIP program are eligible for needs and asset assessments and referral services, information and orientation services, community connections, and support services such as interpretation or childcare. Applicants will become eligible for language assessments, language training, and employment-related services as soon as they become a permanent resident. You can click on the link in the presentations that will be shared following this presentation for a list of federally funded organizations in your community or nearby that help newcomers settle and adjust to life in Canada. Your organization is also encouraged to direct French-speaking newcomers to Francophone service provider organizations. Supporting your candidates' integration into the community. You're encouraged to support newcomers' access to these services and, when necessary, provide additional resources to help address any unmet settlement needs. Once a newcomer employee and their family members arrive in Canada, we are then in what we call the post-arrival stage. Employers honor the commitments they have made in the designation and endorsement stage to ensure the newcomers are integrated into the workplace and in the community. As an employer, you have an important role to play in the integration of your newcomer staff, and you can help set them up for success and long-term retention in the community. On to you, Mikhail.
All right, thank you, Cindy Lynn. So we'll take a quick pause to see if there's any question on permanent resident status or settlement services, either pre or post arrival. Don't see any other questions, so we'll move on to the last section. So first, just as a reminder, obviously most of the travel restriction has been lifted. There's still some in place, so it is important to take that into consideration. So if you're intending on bringing someone from overseas, just to make sure that they meet the requirement to enter the country and that they would meet any type of travel restrictions. So always a good idea to verify the canada.ca/IRCC-COVID-19 website. So additional contact information. So as I mentioned, reach out to us, the Atlantic Outreach Officers, if you have any question as far as whether about what we covered today or anything else immigration related. So we're kind of the service that is available to you until you receive the service from the dedicated service channel account manager service. So as well, Cindy Lynn, the contact information if you have any question about the intercultural competency training, and we have additional information available online. Contact information for your provincial government, again, will be shared with all of you, so you can reach out to them directly for a question about provincial designation and endorsement. And other opportunities for employers and stakeholders in Atlantic Canada. We do offer the virtual learning series where we cover a new topic each month. So these are eye-level presentation, 15-20 minutes. We'll share the information with you if you are interested in joining. Also, we do provide educational activities. So if you are part of the industry association or a chamber of commerce and you would need us to present or take part in a panel discussion, whether it's about the Atlantic immigration program or another immigration related topic, we can definitely do that, whether in person or virtually. So what's going to happen post today's presentation? So by the end of the day today, you will receive a copy of the presentation and also an email confirming that you completed the onboarding training. So there's no certificate. The email will serve as a confirmation that you completed the training. At the same time, we will notify the provincial government that you have completed the training. So that way they will know. So as early as next week, you'll be able to reach out to them to get the provincial designation. And don't forget that we'll provide information on how to enroll for the intercultural competency training. So that's the second step in the process. Again, that one is a mandatory training as well. All right, so now I'll open the floor for the last question and answer period. So if you don't have any other question, the training is now complete. So you have completed the mandatory training. So feel free to leave the session. If you have other questions, please use the chat function or Q&A function on the right-hand side of your screen. And again, you will receive a confirmation email, so not a certificate, by the end of the day today. Yeah, so there's only one more training that is mandatory for this one, and that information will be included in the email. There's also additional training, the learning series, but that's really on a voluntary basis. So it's really just if you want to know about different immigration topics other than the eclectic immigration program. So these are voluntary. All right, so I don't see any other question. I'll still say, oh, some questions are coming in. Perfect. All right. So Drake, a question about the LMIA. So when is the labor market impact assessment required? So that's kind of a loaded question, to be honest. There's over 50 different exemptions of when a labor market impact assessment is not required. So if the person or the position, so sometimes it's the employee, sometimes it's the position itself that would meet the threshold for an exemption. But we do have a great service available at IRCC, the International Mobility Workers Unit, that can provide you opinion on whether or not a labor market impact assessment is required. So Drake, if you have a specific candidate in mind or a specific position you're looking to fill, I would invite you to send us an email so we can set up a time to discuss either by email or by phone, and we can get into a bit more detail of your scenario. So provincial designation. So business is only located in Ontario. You cannot obtain provincial designation. So the Atlantic immigration program is based in Atlantic Canada. So that would be New Brunswick, Newfoundland, or Prince Edward Island and Nova Scotia. So if your company is based in Ontario, you would not be eligible for the Atlantic immigration program. So what is the processing time for work permit? So the work permit processing time will vary based on where your candidate is located. So Janice, on the one of the slide with the work permit, there's a link to our website, and basically you can go and based on the candidate is located in the world, that will have a great impact on the type of processing time you'll be looking at. So it can be anywhere from 2 weeks to 6-7 months. Yes, so for remote work, that would not be eligible. So in this scenario, the company is in Nova Scotia, but the employee is currently in Ontario. That would not qualify. So both the position and the employee needs to be located in Atlantic Canada. So for Ukraine refugee, yes, so there's a specific pathway for them. So Ali, I would invite you to reach out to us by email. We can provide you additional information. Or if you just go on our website and search for Ukraine refugees or UK national, there's a specific pathway for them that is faster than the Atlantic immigration program. It would be our website, the IRCC website. So if the employee is located in Montreal and later relocate to Atlantic Canada, how would that impact their work experience? So the work experience does not have to be completed in Atlantic Canada. So the work experience, we're looking at 1 year in the last 5 years. It can be overseas, it can be in Canada, it could be, 6 months in Montreal, 6 months in New Brunswick. So that has no impact really. So the work experience would count from the day that they start with the company. Are there any other pathways similar to Ukraine for other countries? Not at the moment, no. Well, I guess there is one for Afghan national who would have held the Canadian military during the Canadian military president of Afghanistan, interpreters and whatnot. So yes, so for that, but other than that, no. These pathways are usually just put in place as a temporary measure when there's an international situation. So the work experience again, so it's 1 year, the last 5 years, and it does not have to be with the company. So let's say that you work for company X, that work experience does not have to be for company X. So that work experience has to be 1 year in the last 5 years. It can be with another company, it could be overseas, it could be in Canada, but they need to be eligible for the position that you're hiring them. All right, so I don't think we have any more questions. So again, I would like to thank you for your time this morning. You'll have our email address. Again, I will send the email by the end of the day today. You'll have access to the PowerPoint presentation, our email address. So feel free to reach out and we'll answer any question you may have. All right, thanks everyone and have yourself a great weekend.